Hi, my name is Michael Aaron Ulmer. I'm a conceptual self-portrait artist, and I want to say from the get-go, this video is not going to be polished. It's not going to be clean. It's going to be very rough. I don't plan on doing much editing. But a student from the Netherlands who's studying photography and visual communication reached out to me and wanted to ask me some questions. And when I sit down and type out answers, I overthink everything. And it was taking me too long. And also, I wanted to be able to share this information with everybody else. So think of this as a very relaxed, sit down kind of interview. I'm going to try not to overthink it. And I just want to talk from the heart. But I'm especially excited to answer these questions because it all revolves around surrealism and why I've chosen to be a surrealistic artist. Even me claiming the title of a surrealistic artist is hard for me. We'll get to that later. But I have some tea. Gonna just sit back and I'm gonna answer these questions. The reason why I wanted to do this as well is because it focuses on surrealism, and that's not something I get to talk about very often. So let's begin. I told you, it's gonna be very relaxed. Okay. The first question. Where does the interest in surrealism come from? First off, I guess I have to say, I never stepped into my artistic pursuits being like saying I want to be a surrealistic artist. And I would be honest in saying that it took me I didn't even start claiming myself as a surrealistic artist until about 2 years ago. Even though every time I described my work, I would call it surreal. But for some reason, I had this block in my head where I was like, I'm just not surreal enough. Like, I'm not Magritte. My work isn't that surreal that I can't claim that title. Until recently, I mean, when you start describing every single one of your pieces as surreal, you're obviously a surrealistic artist. But for me, the interest in surrealism comes from not even wanting to be surreal. I just thought I was chasing and pursuing the weird ideas in my head. And that's what I called them. Just the weird ideas. But I realize now that my pursuit of surrealism is kind of my rejection of normalcy. My entire life, I've kind of tried to defy and reject normalcy. I don't exactly know why. I think it's because my brain is a little bit spicy. It's a little bit extra. And with that, I've never quite, this sounds weird, but I've never understood normal life. It just seems like all the things that people wanted to pursue, like having a nice, comfortable job and a house and all these things, it just didn't interest me. And so my whole life, I've tried to defy normalcy, and I feel like my choice in surrealism has been a part of that. It's by saying like, oh, yeah, a lovely landscape photo. No, let's add somebody floating in the middle. It's just saying I'm not going to participate in normal society. So to me, that's what surrealism is. And that's me personally. I think surrealism is like a rebellion and a rejection against normal society and kind of saying like, I can do anything I want. I can paint any picture I want to. Nothing has to be grounded in realism. So that to me is what surrealism is. It's a rejection of normalcy. Next question. What inspired you to create surrealistic photography? Were there specific events or experiences that shape your artistic vision? I think I just kind of explained that a little bit. I think it just continues that, like, to me, surrealism is rebellion. You're saying, I don't need to make sense. This doesn't need to be real. So yeah, I would say things that shaped me as an artist, I was heavily influenced by film. When I was growing up, I was obsessed with movies. I was obsessed with film. And most of visually and the way I express emotion through my work comes from my initial desire to be a filmmaker. Because that's where I kind of started my trajectory, as I wanted to be a filmmaker. And so the influences that came for me were experiencing film. And I would say the biggest thing that influenced me as an artist is my entire life. I've just felt things so deeply. I am the type of person that just emotions hit me hard. And my entire life, ever since I was a young kid, and even in my interactions with people, if I would just cross somebody's path and have an interaction with somebody, if they were kind of even just a person at the store, at the cash register, if I could sense something was off with them, I would kind of latch onto that and carry that with me and think about it and analyze it. And I would start to create little scenarios in my head of like I would create very specific scenarios of like, oh, before work, they probably this happened and this happened. And I would just start to kind of like, I would feel emotions from people and I would start to create elaborate stories as to why. And I think that was me kind of trying to figure out, like, I was trying to make sense of why I just felt things so deeply. So for me, stepping into art has always been a way of kind of expressing that. And I've always wanted to share the deep emotions I feel. So that's kind of why I stepped into art. And I thought that was only possible through film, but I learned it can also be done through photography. We'll get to more of that later. What does surrealism mean to you, and how do you define it in the context of photography? Defining surrealism makes me nervous. I just want, preface, I am not like a classically trained artist. All the skills that I have in terms of photography and even photo editing and video and everything were all self-taught. I took like a few graphic design classes in college, but it was mostly just kind of refreshing skills that I'd already learned on my own. So everything that I've learned technically and even in the art world has been on my own. So I'm so nervous to speak on art as a broader subject, even though I've studied it. And one of my favorite, when I started studying art history in college, my brain lit up. It was the most incredible thing. And I will say, studying art history in college has shaped me as an artist. That's where I learned my love for Renaissance paintings and like Titian and Da Vinci and El Greco, and I use their influence into my art a lot. But I deviated from the question a lot. Surrealism, I know the proper definition of surrealism is artwork that has to do with like dreamlike or subconscious and things that are kind of like untethered from reality. And I agree to that, but my version of surrealism, I specialize in what I call, and this is made up just for me, so bear with me. I specialize in what I call photorealistic surrealism, and that's where what you're viewing in the picture is not real. And it's obviously not real, but I like to edit and shoot my photographs in such a way that theoretically that picture could have been taken with the click of a shutter. Yes, there's 20 versions of me and things are happening that can't be real, but all the shadow, all the light, everything is saying that it is real. And I know some surrealistic artists, it's like hyper surreal, where it's like nothing is real. Like there are like shadows aren't real, and I love that. I'm inspired by that, but my personal desire has always been to make kind of more photorealistic, and I've dabbled in some non-photorealistic, but for the most part, I find the most enjoyment in making something that feels real but isn't real. And yeah, I'll leave that at that. What techniques and technologies do you use to enhance surrealism in photography? Techniques and technologies. So everything, I mean, my biggest tool is definitely Photoshop. All of my stuff is photo manipulation, but, and I'm big on this, my specific work, everything is taken by a camera by myself. So all the pieces of my art, I take a picture of, and then I use that, I manipulate that in Photoshop. I know some people create digital assets or they pull things off the internet. I've only had to do that like once. I needed a picture of the Earth and I couldn't travel to space to get that picture, so I had to pull that from the internet. But for me, I take a picture of everything. If I want fire or smoke in my picture, I go out there and I take a picture of smoke and fire. And that's an important part of my process because I love photography. and I want to blend all of that. But my biggest tools are, of course, camera, taking pictures, and then Photoshop. That's where I bring the entire vision together. I would say without Photoshop, my work wouldn't exist. It's a huge key part of my process. And then as far as, what was the question? To enhance surrealism, definitely, I would definitely think Photoshop. I'll move on. How do you handle the practical challenges of creating surrealistic self-portraits, such as lighting, location, and props? I like this question. It's not easy. It's very, very difficult. And oftentimes, this is going to sound weird, but the part that I hate the most about the process is the actual photo shoot. I love when I get everything done and I get to sit at my computer and piece it together. But it is not easy taking pictures of yourself, number one. It's not easy putting yourself in these environments. I love to shoot out in nature. And then when I shoot out in nature, I like to be in nature. If someone's walking around a place out in the woods, they're going to be dirty, so I need to be dirty. If there's mud around, I need to be covered in mud. I like to ground myself in the story and the scene as much as possible. And so when you're out there taking pictures of yourself, covered in mud, trying to get everything locked in, it's a lot. My brain is so tired after. I keep getting distracted. How do you handle the practical challenges? The biggest way I handle all the practical challenges is I make very, very elaborate plans. So I start by doing a sketch of my work, and then when I sketch out the idea, I start to think of like what I'm gonna need. So it's like how I'm gonna light it, what I'm gonna need. But there's a question later about going through my whole process. So I'll save some of that because I'll tell you like my whole process of it. But I think the way I handle it best is when I get out there sometimes, the worst thing that happens is I get really impatient. And I'll set up everything and I'll start taking pictures. And it's so tiring and I want to quit almost immediately. But having to remind myself that like when you sit back at your computer and you look through these pictures, you're going to be mad at yourself. So really taking a deep breath and being like, no, I'm going to shoot for another hour. I'm going to get some more shots. Because that's the thing. When you're shooting self-portraits specifically and you're shooting yourself, any little minor change you make takes forever. If you want to adjust the light just a little bit, you have to adjust the light. You have to get your camera started going on a timer. You get in position. You take the pictures, you go back behind the camera, you look at the pictures, you see what other adjustments you need to make, and then you make the adjustment again. You get back in front, you go back behind, and you have to keep doing that until you dial everything in. And it's just a lot, and it's so easy to get fed up and to lose your patience and to be like, and this I think is one of the worst things any self-portrait artist can do is be like, you know what, it's good enough. It's good enough, and you just get fed up. So I think the biggest challenge is just remembering to be patient and remembering the end goal. And that I may be uncomfortable and I may be frustrated in the moment right now, but this piece is going to live on forever. And yeah, so to give it its proper work and proper time. Can you discuss a specific work or series that you are particularly proud of and explain why it's so important to you? I'm going to discuss two. A series. So when I first started self-portrait work, I started it in 2019. I'll go into more of this later. But I started it as just I was going to do a year long of a self-portrait every single month. And that was it. And I was calling it my on-again, off-again relationship with my brain. And I just wanted to make these self-portraits that brought to life this tumultuous relationship I have with my brain, where it feels on again, it feels off again. And so that's what I stepped in doing. And I went the whole year. I did a self-portrait every month, and I fell in love with the process. So I would say I'm really proud of that first series of those 12 self-portraits I did that month because I just went for it. I had no business doing it. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just went for it, and I'm very proud of myself for that. a specific piece I'm proud of would have to be Legacy, or the one that is the candles on my head. That piece means so much to me on a deeper level, but also technically it was a challenge. So that piece was I forget which year, but that year both of my grandparents had died within 3 months of each other. And it was one of them was very unexpected, and it just felt like so much. And the end of the year had come, and it was December, and I knew I wanted to do a self-portrait honoring them in some way, because I felt a lot of guilt. I felt a lot of guilt because I just felt like I wasn't the best grandchild in the final, like, year or 2 or 3 of their life. And so I just I felt like I also wanted to do something to honor them, because they had such an integral role in raising me, especially my grandma. She was the one who always encouraged creativity, and I would say without her kind of raising me and sparking creativity in me, I wouldn't be sitting here doing this. I wouldn't have wanted to pursue art or continue in my creative endeavors. So yeah, I know I needed to do something to honor them, but I just couldn't think of an idea. I couldn't think of anything that felt right. And I remember I went for a run, and I took out my headphones, and I was like, you know what? As I run, I'm just going to run, and I'm going to think of an idea. I'm going to really dwell on this. And it was as I was running, this kind of idea of like their flames extinguishing. Their flames are extinguished, but their flames live on in me, hit me. And then this idea of this person just covered in wax, and the candles on the head, and flames being lit but also being blown out just came to me. And I was mid-run, and I just started bawling. And I sobbed for like half a mile. And the second I ended that run, I sent a message to my friend, and I was like, I have an idea. It's this. The candle's on the head. The wax is melting down. And it was just like, it was so clear and so immediate. And then when I tried to do it, it was so hard to figure out how I was actually going to do it practically. I first tried to do it digitally. That didn't work. I tried to do it with all different types of things that weren't wax. I tried like mayonnaise. I tried cake icing. It was messy. It was awful. It wasn't working. And then I finally kind of sorted it out. And so I think the reason I feel so proud of that one is because it represents something very personal and very deep for me. And it just feels like now when my work is spoken about, when I'm spoken about as an artist, my grandparents are also a part of that conversation, because I found a way to include them. And that makes me happy that because they're a part of it, because they inspired me so much. But now I get to actually make them a part of it, and that just feels right for me. Yeah, it also feels good because technically it was a huge challenge. Even that shoot, which I shot right here, in this room, I was just a wreck because it was so hard. I was pouring this hot candle wax on my head, and I didn't think it was going to be good. I thought it was going to be horrible. And as I shot it, I remember afterwards being like, well, that sucked. That was awful. That's going to look ridiculous. And then it ended up blowing up and being one of my most popular pieces, which is kind of just a cherry on the cake, because I genuinely thought that was gonna be a pile of garbage. So yeah, that would be one of the ones I'm most proud of. It feels the most special to me. How has your style evolved since your first surrealistic self-portraits? Are there particular works that were crucial in this development? My style has evolved big time. Somewhere along the line, I learned that every little thing in a piece is saying something. So the color that I choose, the clothes that I wear, the setting, every little piece of prop. And when I started at the beginning, it's like I knew that, but I wasn't doing the work to make all of those decisions. I was just kind of throwing on any clothes, getting out there and doing it. And the more I did it, the more I realized everything is saying something, so I need to make sure I'm choosing what that says. Excuse me. And not just letting it figure it out for itself. So that's changed. I mean, of course, my photography has gotten better. My just techniques have gotten better. My photo editing skills have gotten a million times better. I look back at some of my first ones and I don't like the edits on them. They're not bad. They're just, I know I have techniques now that I've developed just from doing it for 6-7 years now that are so much better. And I've gotten much faster and quicker at it. And I've also learned to trust myself more. I stepped into every single one of my first pieces with so much apprehension. And now I trust my gut more. I still question everything, but I do trust my gut more. Are there particular works that were crucial in this development? There were a lot of particular ones, but it's just every time I decided to push myself outside of my comfort zone, that's the ones I learned the most in. When I chose to, so originally I would do everything outside because, and here's a fun thing, if you're doing composite work or self-portrait composite work, when you work with nature, it's very easy to make cutouts. So whenever you have two pictures that line up and they're both grass, you can just take a soft brush, blend it out. You don't have to have clean cutouts. And like trees and things like that, things that aren't geometrical, are very easy to do. So I started my work doing things that were more simplistic because I knew I wasn't there yet. So I did things in fields and things like that, and that would be my recommendation for anybody starting off doing composite work of any kind. Save anything that's like very geometric. Keep it to organic things. And so I started that way and developed my skills. And then I started to, and I never at the beginning had my characters interact. So whenever you're one person and you choose to interact with yourself, like for example, if you want your characters to hold hands, there are shadows right here that you have to do. And since you have to do them separately, you put a hand here and you put a hand here, there's no shadow there. So now you have to add the shadow. And adding shadows and making them look realistic is extremely difficult. So when I started, I didn't let my characters interact with each other. And if I did, they were at a distance, so they didn't do that. And so as I developed my skills, I started to get my characters just a little bit closer and closer together until now a lot of my work, everybody is like all over each other. And that just took time to develop those skills. But the more I pushed myself, because I would have an idea and I'd be like, ooh, that scares me. And then I'd be like, you know what, let's go for it. And then I would do it and I would learn from it. And those milestones and continuing to push myself, I would say is what's helped me develop my skills the most. Let's see what's next. How do you start a new project? Do you have a fixed method or is it flexible? My method is both fixed and flexible. So I do a self-portrait every single month. And for me, that's just a way for my brain to not feel overwhelmed. Because I think if I just left it open-ended, I would always feel like I should be creating. And I would feel like even at the end of the year, I would feel like I didn't do enough, even if I did a piece every other week. But also, it gives me the time to be able to really focus on a piece and give it its kind of proper work. So my method is like this. At the beginning of the month, I look inside myself and I have a real ugly, honest conversation with myself. And I say, what am I battling with? What am I struggling with? Where am I at right now? And how can I express that and represent that visually? Because my pieces are meant for me. They're meant for a way for me to kind of process feelings, process emotions. And I share them as a bonus, but they're meant for me and my kind of therapeutic healing journey. So I start with that. And once I kind of dial in on that, I start to develop the visual. And then, but sometimes, and this is why I say it's fixed and it's mixed. Wait, was it fixed and mixed? Fixed and flexible. My bad. It is mixed though. Um, because that's how I start, but every once in a while I start a month off where I just have this visual ticking inside of my head. Where I'm like, I have this visual idea, and then I kind of develop a concept based off that visual. So sometimes I start in my fixed position, but sometimes it kind of turns on its head. And then there have been some months, because I do it monthly, where I just don't have an idea. Where my literal thought is, I don't know where I'm at. I have no clue where I'm at. And so for those, I usually lean into that. And I lean into the idea of like, well, I don't have an idea. Why do I not have an idea? And that usually sends me down the road. So it varies, but I would say overall, mostly it's pretty fixed in the sense of I start with that initial, how am I feeling and how can I represent that visually? And then a big part of it is, and this is something I'm big on, is like when I start to develop the visual, one of the first questions I ask is, what's the time period? And like I don't know why I'm obsessed with time period. And sometimes the time period is timeless. But I'm really obsessed with representing moments in time. That's just something that excites me. So if you look at a lot of my work, a lot of them have these like, I kind of lump pieces together. So there'll be a group that are like what I call timeless. There'll be a group that are kind of like 80s inspired. There's a group that's kind of like 50s, 60s inspired. And I'm obsessed with time period. So that's a big thing that kind of drives my visual narrative. Can you walk us through the process from concept to completion of a surrealistic self-portrait? How do you choose themes, symbolism that you incorporate in your photos? I just kind of talked about that a little bit. But yeah, so it starts off, where am I at emotionally? What do I want to kind of get out? How do I want to represent it? And oftentimes, it comes from a place of frustration. There will either be an interaction I have with someone. Sometimes it's strangers. Sometimes it's people I know and love. Sometimes it'll just be a frustration with myself. I did something that I'm frustrated about, or I'm annoyed with, or I regret. And like it usually stems from these emotions, and so I start from there, and I'm like, okay, how can I represent that visually? And I just start kind of mulling it over. It just takes time. That's why I love that it's a monthly self-portrait for me, because I can start at the beginning of the month, and then I can just chew on that idea. And then I may think of something visually sometime in the middle of the month, and then I have to expand on that. And I'm like, okay, now how do I take that visual and represent the concept in the best way possible? And so like this work right here is usually just refining that concept until I land on the best idea for me, and one that I can execute as a self-portrait. And then, what are we doing? So after I do that, I do a sketch of my work, and that helps me plan the shoot. And then I pick a day. I do a lot of my work outside, so a lot of it is weather dependent. I hate sunny days. I don't like working in the sun because the sun, once again, shadows. Here's another little tip for anybody who does composite work at all. The sun creates very hard shadows. Like right here, you can see this light is creating shadows. So anytime you do composite work, you have to factor in all the shadows. If you have an overcast, cloudy day, your shadows are much more softer and you don't have to do as much work. That's a little tip. But also, I don't particularly like the look. It depends. I've done some pieces where I specifically chose to shoot in the harsh sun because I wanted that look. But for the most part, I like that soft overcast look. So that requires me to be kind of weather dependent. And when I'm working on a timeline, sometimes the month is about to be over. I only have 3 or 4 days left in the month, and it's just sunny days, and I have to commit to that. I don't get a choice. So I wait on that, and then I pack up all my gear, I go shoot it, and then I come back after the shoot, and I question all my life choices. we'll say this. I don't think there has been one shoot where I stepped away thinking, that was great, I got it. I've stepped away from almost every shoot being like, I don't know if that worked or not, but I gave it my all. Because when you're doing self-portraits, like, you don't know. You hope you got it, and I go back and I look through my camera, but sometimes I'm covered in mud and slime and goo, and like, it's hard. So you hope you got it. I always try and do an extra hour of work. Once I feel like I got the picture, I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep shooting for an hour to make sure I got it. And 80% of the time, the pictures that I end up using are from that second hour. And then I bring them all back. I usually wait till the next day to start work on it because I'm over it. And then the next day, I load up the pictures, and then I select the images that I'm going to use. That's a whole process. I just have to go through and select the images, because when I'm selecting the images, it's not about what looks best, and it's not about what is the coolest. It's about what represents the message the best. So when I'm shooting, especially if my face is in it, I'll do facial expressions across the spectrum. And then if I'm kind of unsure of where I want it to land, and then in the computer, I have to go and I have to choose which one represents the message the most. And then I do the full edit, and yeah, so that's kind of the whole process. How do you determine titles and descriptions for your work? Throughout the month, as I'm working on the picture, I'm also working on the descriptions. Those kind of like are the final piece of the puzzle for me. I wait to write the descriptions after I've finished the piece, because sometimes I step into a piece with it like it's going to be this and it's going to represent this, and then when I finish it, it's evolved into something different. And that's happened a lot. So I always try and leave those open to interpretation until the very end. And then at the end, it's kind of like the picture is a way for me to pour out my feelings, and the description is a way for me just to kind of like get it all out of me. It's my final act of just like purging all the feelings, purging these emotions, and just putting a big old stamp on it. But the way that looks is afterwards, I bring the picture up on my computer, I look at it, I put on some music. I have a playlist that like inspires me. It's very like dark, dramatic music. And then I just start typing. And I usually make like 3 or 4 versions. And then once again, I spend a lot of time trimming it down and then go with that. The titles are interesting. Sometimes I come up with a title when I come up with an idea. For example, my most recent piece, Target Practice. That idea came to me all at once, and it came to me with the title Target Practice. Like, I knew that's what it was. It represented, I like my titles to give a representation, a little deeper level, a deeper meaning to the piece. But also when I think of a title, I'm trying to think of when you see this piece and you see this title, I want the title to add a layer of depth to the piece. So you see the piece and you're like, oh, interesting. And then what I want is when I want the title to be this extra dig and this extra like a revelation. So I always want it to reveal something. But for example, one of my most recent pieces, Extinguisher, I came up with that title like 20 minutes before I posted it. I toiled and toiled over that title. Even stepping in, I didn't have it. And I was thinking of all these things. And so for example, the way I have my piece and then I have my title and I want the title to be an extra layer of depth. When I first showed the piece, it has fire on one side and water on the other. And I didn't want to be confused that the people pouring the water on were like the good people. I wanted, because most of the time when we see somebody on fire, it's bad, but the fire represented life, ideas, the spark, creativity, joy. And so I wanted to make sure we knew that like the bad people, we'll say the bad thing in this picture was the water. So I didn't want to call it anything like Inferno because that infers, yes, we need to put that fire out. So instead I called it Extinguisher because I wanted to be like, this piece is about the people that extinguish your fire. And it was so fun because I feel like people in the comments got it when they were saying things like, I have extinguishers in my life. And I was like, yes, that's what I wanted. I wanted it to have that extra depth. So sometimes it happens naturally. Sometimes I really have to work for it. Where does inspiration come from and how does a project come about? I feel like I talked about that. How do you make this work and express your inspiration? I talked about that. Which elements of surrealism appeal to you and which ones do you use while photographing? I talked about this a little bit before, but I really like to specialize in photorealistic things. I don't know why. I love it. There's something that excites me about about the idea that, like, when you do look at it, like I said before, it could have been taken with the click of a shutter, but also it absolutely could not have been taken with the click of a shutter. And I just love that juxtaposition. And I think that's what surrealism is all about. It's the juxtaposition of the real and the absurd and kind of smashing them together and just having, and that's, to me, surrealism is having fun. Surrealism is an artist being like, I'm going to do what I want, how I want, when I want. And you can understand it or you can not understand it. I don't have to care. So yeah. What is the effect of using surreal features in self-portrait photography? I've kind of discussed that. Okay, this next question is my favorite. How do you think the role of surrealism in contemporary photography has evolved compared to traditional painting? I'm obsessed with this question. And it's such a good question, thank you, because I've thought about this for a while, and this has influenced my work a lot. When it comes to surrealism in a painting, when the audience steps up to a painting, no matter what the painting is, they know that that painting isn't real. So even if it's a landscape, yes, it could be inspired by a place. And back in the day before photography, I think paintings were accepted more as like a realistic representation. But now we know a painting is an artist's version of that. Even a photorealistic painting, we know that is a painting. It is not real. It does not exist in real life. So even just the act of an audience member stepping up to a painting is knowing that it's not real. But when we step up to a photograph, our initial response is, this is real. This is something that exists in reality because that's the relationship we have with photographs, that they are realistic, they are captured. So when you see a surrealistic painting, it's exciting, it's fun, but you know it's not real. And so even when we just approach a surrealistic painting, we have a different mindset. But when we approach a surrealistic photograph, we're expecting realism. We're expecting a moment captured in time by a photograph. So when it's presented as surrealism, it's just an extra layer of kind of subversion. And there's something about that excites me, especially, and that's why I try to specialize in photorealistic surrealism. I want you to, from a distance, if you just saw it and you're squinty-eyed, you'd be like, oh, that's a photograph and it's real. And then as you get closer and closer and closer, you start to realize like the elements in it look realistic, but this could never happen. Like there couldn't be 20 versions of this guy. Or there's just elements about it that aren't real. And there's something about that I love. I love the idea of the juxtaposition of a realistic photograph with a surrealistic image. So the relationship of that, but over like surrealistic art in painting and photographs, I think is fun. And I think the expression of that in photographs for me has just added a little extra layer of fun. I really like that question. What was the most surprising interpretation or reaction to your work from someone else? Has this changed your own view of the work? Also, how does your audience respond to the surrealistic elements in your work? I will say this. Excuse me. When I first started my work, I did not expect anyone to get it. I didn't expect anyone to like it. I thought I would post it on social media or I would share it and my mom would like it and that would be it. And she would like it out of pity. It was coming from this place of just trying to express my own feelings and emotions. And the response to me has been a huge surprise. People not only connecting with the messages of my work, but understanding and loving the surrealistic elements. Now, when I do a piece, every little thing in that piece, I add all these extra layers to represent something. And it has genuinely blown my mind when people will talk to me about the piece and they understood every little thing I put in there. For example, my piece, Saint Anxious. Someone wrote an article about that, and I had never talked about all the references I made to that, and they got every single reference I made spot on. And it felt like, in that moment, it felt like someone could see me whole for the very first time. I've never felt more understood, and I think that's been the best thing about specifically the surrealistic elements of my work, of making it and just being like, not everybody's gonna get this, but the people who do, they're gonna really resonate with it, and that's been it's brought me so much joy, and I honestly think it's why I continue to do my work. It's this feeling of connection and community with people that I've never experienced in a way that is even close to how good that makes me feel. How do you deal with things that don't go according to plan or blunder? How do you solve this? How do you deal with setbacks or creative blocks in your work? I deal with things that don't go according to plan very poorly, in the sense of I get really frustrated. I would say things don't go to plan more often than they do go to plan. And I think if you step into the situation knowing that with some patience and grace, you're better off. But now I've learned that things aren't going to go well, and a part of the process is pivoting and evolving in the moment. You can't be so rigid that you have to be flexible. I think in any artistic endeavor, unless you have unlimited time, unlimited money, unlimited resources, then yeah, you can always come back and tweak and control until you get it exactly how you are. But few of us have those things. So when you realistically, there are things you can't do. You can't always have full control over every little thing. So a big part of the process has been learning things aren't going to go the way I want, but that's okay. And I'm going to pivot. I have pieces that don't work out. I have 2 pieces that I've never released. They are not going to see the light of day. And I say that because they just didn't go right. The one piece, technically, it's just not good. And yeah, it's just technically, it's not good. I did as much work as I could on it, and I realized that I was not going to bring that back from the dead. I tried new techniques. They didn't work. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to throw this one in the trash. I came up with a new idea and I moved on. The other one, technically, it's good. It's good. It's crispy. It's crisp. It's sharp. It's good. All the pieces, all the elements came together. It came out exactly how I want it to be. But after I finished it and looked at it, I was like, this isn't anything new. This isn't saying anything new. If anything, it felt like something I'd seen before. And I was like, oh. And so when I finally saw the finished piece, I was like, this doesn't excite me. This isn't worth this sounds weird, but it just felt like it wasn't worth putting out into the world because it didn't have anything more to say. I feel like that conversation had already been had. So I put that one in the trash. And I think that's a part of it. And I think if you step into every one of your artistic pieces thinking with the idea of like, you know what, if this doesn't work out, I don't have to release it. It gives you this freedom to play, to explore, and to grow. We're wrapping up here. This has been much longer than I thought it was. I'm so sorry. What do you hope people feel or think when they see your work? It's weird. I really do. Most of the time, I hope people feel uncomfortable. My work is meant to be kind of ugly. It's meant to be dark. It's meant to represent these big emotions. So a lot of times I hope they feel uncomfortable. And even some of my work that isn't uncomfortable, I try and lure people in with a fun image. And then when you really analyze it and you break it down, there's a little bit of a sting in there. Because most of my work is about exposing yourself. It's about having honest conversations with yourself. It's about realizing that you're not a good person. Not always, but it is. It's about realizing that like we all have these dark parts inside of us, and it's like it's not something we need to hide away. It's not something we need to be ashamed of. It's something we need to look at. We need to embrace. We need to find those dark corners of ourselves and give those parts of ourselves a hug and say like it's okay that you exist. Because it exists for everybody, and I think one of the worst things we can do is ignore those parts of ourselves. So my goal for my work is always to just help people expose those parts of themselves, because that's what I'm doing when I create a piece. I'm outing my dark thoughts. I'm outing my dark feelings. I'm like pushing them out into the light when they don't want to be, because I know that's where healing comes from, and I want that for other people. So, yeah. Do you see a growing interest in surrealistic photography among new generation of artists and photographers? Yes. I get asked a lot by young artists questions just like this. I have 2 other people that I have to respond to questions to, and I've done a few already. The interest in surrealism is growing, and once again, it goes back to the very first thing I said. I think surrealism is a rejection of normalcy. I think surrealism is a rejection of the establishment. I think surrealism is a rejection of a lot of what it is that most people strive for or go for. And I think right now that is so prevalent. So I think we're going to see a lot more surrealistic work. I think young people are interested in that. I think young people are interested in defying expectations of themselves. So I hope so. I love to see it. Yeah. What else do you want to tell me that I haven't asked? I have talked for so long. I will just say this. I've been inspired a lot. I think I talked about this by Renaissance paintings. And just in general, I'm not typically inspired by other photography. There's something about that just doesn't click with me. Once I see a photograph, especially a surrealistic photograph, I feel like that idea is off limits. Like once I see it, I'm like, well, I can't do that. And I've had ideas where I cooked up an idea on my own, and then I saw an image that was similar, and I was like, oh, I can't do that. And I abandoned that. Because for me, it feels like if I'm not bringing something new to the table, then why do it? I always want to be kind of bringing something new to the table. And sometimes I create things and they look very similar to other pieces and I didn't intend that, but at least it came from a place of kind of like my own thought, my own idea. When I first started, an artist, I think this was a question that I skipped. A contemporary artist that really inspired me was Nicholas Bruno, and I just feel like I need to talk about him because he was the first one I saw that was really diving into that photorealistic surrealism. His work is so technically sharp, and that really opened my eyes because at that point I had only seen surrealistic work like even like Magritte. Like it was very avant-garde. It was very surrealistic but unrealistic in that sense. And his blended those two, and that really opened my eyes to be like, oh, like it showed me an opportunity, kind of a door I could walk through. So Nicholas Bruno, especially when I first started out, huge inspiration. I love his work. And then, of course, Magritte, he always just sneaks in. And it's so strange. And I say this, his work fascinates me. It's not work that I'm like visually drawn to. There are other artists that visually I'm more drawn to their work. I am drawn to more like darker things with darker themes. But there's just something about Magritte's work that just captures that surreal. I think he is kind of the poster child for surrealism, because it just captures that kind of extraordinary. And one of my pieces, Fantôme, is my kind of homage to Magritte. And that's, once again, I chose the title Fantôme, spelled, which is phantom. And instead of calling it Phantom, I wanted to call it Phantom or Ghost in French, Fantôme. And the pose and the person was very Magritte inspired, so that was kind of my homage to Magritte. I do feel like he is the poster child for surrealism. But I'm mostly inspired by Renaissance work, and actually, I'll take some of my pieces, and I use Renaissance work for lighting and composition. And I will take a piece and I will do the exact composition. I will do the exact poses, and not just that. I do have one with the classic Renaissance hand pose, but even the way people interact, I think there's something that adds to the surrealism of a photograph when you try and emulate people painting people. Let me explain. The painters were trying to paint realistic people, but there's something about Renaissance paintings where the people don't look real. They look like Renaissance painting. The way they're even just kind of like heads turn and necks, and the way they hold their hands, there's something surrealistic about it. So I've kind of taken, this is going to sound weird, but I've taken their attempt to be real, and I brought it into the real life to make it surreal. So when I do poses, I emulate certain Renaissance paintings. So I usually do a deep dive, and I find certain paintings and I find poses, even just the way the neck. It's all about the neck and the hands. They do something in Renaissance paintings that doesn't feel real. So I emulate that in my work to bring that feeling of surreal. And then also composition-wise, the masters of Renaissance paintings gave us the best compositions ever. And so I just use them as a template. And to me, it's fun that I kind of get to have that as a resource. Like, how exciting that we get to use them as a resource. And then lighting is I am always trying to emulate Rembrandt. I think everybody's trying to emulate Rembrandt lighting. Specifically, there have been pieces that like I have spent hours and hours trying to emulate Rembrandt lighting. And the crazy thing is, I never get it right, and I'm always frustrated because he was just so good at that soft pop of highlight. Love it. This has gone on too long. Thank you for bearing with me. It just excites me that young people are interested in photography. They're interested in surrealism. They're interested in pursuing the arts and pursuing their passion. That's what I want so much. When I was growing up, I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have people who like showed me that this was a possibility. So I want to be that for other people. So my encouragement for young people always is, the road of an artist never looks like you think it will. It's very challenging, and it's just filled with a lot of ups and downs. Find a way to be consistent. Find a way that works for you to continue to work and continue to develop your skills. And that's the most important thing. Develop your skills. Never stop pushing the boundaries of what you can do. If it scares you, you're probably in the right direction.